Hello everyone, and welcome to our MakerFest module on miniatures painting. My name is Randy, and I am going to be leading this little session. This is the pre-recorded version that we're putting up after, or in case of technical difficulties. So miniatures painting. Today we're going to go over what exactly miniatures painting is, some of the tools you'll need that'll make your life easier, and just a little kind of basic overview of painting and the results. This is not for anyone who's ever painted a miniature. I'm not actually a very good miniature painter. I do it for my own pleasure, and so I've been asked to show people what it is. There are plenty of videos by people far more skilled than me online if you're interested in more advanced techniques. So this is more of just a general overview of what miniatures painting is, the basics of what you do, and kind of the basics of what you'll need. So with that being said, if you've ever painted a miniature and you're shutting this down now, I fully understand, and good for you. For everyone sticking around and learning about what miniatures are, well, hopefully you'll find this informative and useful. So miniatures, there's a lot of different kind of miniatures, and really they're just anything smaller than normal that you want to paint. So there's historical miniatures. So here I've got a Tiger 1 World War II tank, unpainted. There's spaceships from popular fantasy and science, or spaceships from popular science fiction series. So I've got a Battlestar. This is also unpainted. There's board games can have miniatures as well. This is from a board game called Gloomhaven that I've painted for a friend. So this one's actually done, and it's got colored. So most miniatures will come unpainted to start. And I've got a couple of. So here, actually, I'll just give it. So here's an unpainted, unprimed, straight out of the box zombie from a game called Zombicide. So this is the bare plastic. So board games, they can come just figures from a board game like this. A lot of other times though, you can actually get miniatures you have to put together yourself, and they'll come on this plastic that's called a sprue, where you have to cut them out, glue them together, assemble them yourself in whatever poses you want. Miniatures can be metal, they can be plastic, they can be resin. They can come in a whole lot of different scales. So they're different than models in that they're generally solid. So a model will be like different pieces that are hollow within, but a miniature is more a solid small statue or small piece. So this is actually a resin miniature. This is from a game called Monster Apocalypse. This one I did have to assemble myself, but yeah. So there's a lot of different materials miniatures can come in. There's a lot of independent miniature makers on the market selling spaceships like this one. You can order them from places like Shapeways. If you just Google spaceship miniatures, you can get a whole bunch. They come even within the sizes. So, like here, I've got this storage crate that goes with these, which are a very popular series known as Warhammer. Scaled to them to just help you make scenes, help you if you ever play a game, then it gives you like different things to play over. So when you want painting miniatures, you can really it's anything you're interested in small. I particularly like Warhammer 40,000. So here's kind of my latest guy. I've got 95% finished. And I painted him just using basic techniques. Again, I'm not a very good painter, but we're going to go over those basic techniques. He needs a little cleaning up, but he's about 95% done. So you can go from bare plastic to something like this. One thing I am going to say, like I said, I'm not the best painted miniature. I do it for my own pleasure. When you are looking at videos and pictures of other miniatures, you are going to see some amazingly painted miniatures by people who are really good at this. Do not be discouraged if your painting is not as good as theirs. Unless you're devoting 8 hours a day, 7 days a week to this, for some of these pictures, you will not be as good. So, yeah, this guy I've started. You will not be as good as them. So, yeah. So that is kind of what the basics of miniature painting is. Now, what are you going to need for painting miniatures? Well, the first thing, like I showed you here, it starts with the bare plastic. You do not want to paint directly onto the bare plastic. And they can be in different shades, but you do not want to paint on the bare plastic. The paint won't adhere properly. It can flake off later as it dries. So what you want to start with is prime. And I'm not recommending any particular brand. There are the brands I use that you may notice, but I'm not recommending any particular brand. I suggest you find a brand that works for you, and go with it. And don't be afraid to try multiple brands. So yeah, this is a can of prime. Prime is the first thing you have to do after assembling or unpacking your miniature. Prime is a special kind of paint. It adheres and bonds with the plastic, so it won't flake off. And it also gives you a nice, even color to work off of. Sometimes after there can be little discolorations in the plastic. This will give you a nice, even shade. Now, they come in lots of colors. I got black. Here's a gray. There's gray. There's actually a whole bunch of reds, blues. Any color you can imagine, you can get a prime. I have primed most of these in black. But also here, this guy has been primed in the gray. This is actually a white, a kind of white. So the different color prime you use will have an effect on your later painting. White primes, lighter colored primes, will give a brighter model, brighter colors. Black prime gives a darker finished color. But one thing I also note is black prime hides your sins. If you have little missed places in kind of the crevices of models, like if you can see under his cloak, well, you managed to get it, but there is a little bit in there that isn't painted. Black appears to be shadows, so it will hide your sins that way. So it's less apparent if you've missed a small place. So priming is the first step. I'm not going to demonstrate it because it is a spraying paint and I'm inside, and do not prime inside. Yeah, it says it very clearly on the can. Do not prime inside. There's a whole lot of warnings on these cans. So do not prime inside. Prime only in a well-ventilated location. And yes, if you have a mask, which I hope you do at this point, wear a mask to keep yourself safe. So after you've primed, though, you should have, and you want to make sure you get the prime all over the miniature. And I think I got an example. No, it wasn't that one. Here he is. So yes, so here's one I primed, but you can see. Let's see if you can see. You can't really with the camera, but okay. Inside there's a little bit of red. I actually gotta add some more prime because there were a couple of little nooks and crannies that didn't get this guy. But you want a nice even coat of prime. When priming, weather is a factor. You do not want to prime your miniatures when it is too cold, because then the prime can freeze in the air. You don't want it when it is too wet, so rain, that can make it clump up, make it a little gooey on the model. And you don't want it when it's too hot, because then the prime can actually dry before it hits the model. It is a little bit of an art. You will get used to it after you prime a few models. But you want a nice, even coat of prime. to start your model. Once you have your models primed, you're going to move on to painting. I'm going to go over a few painting techniques, and these painting techniques use different brushes. So I'm just going to lay out a few brushes here. So all these ones in the middle. It's useful to have more than one brush because then you can switch colors, switch colors, switch what you're doing quickly. And with the techniques I'm showing you, if a brush gets too wet, you can then get a new one and start up again. So, brushes come in various sizes and various shapes. You got big ones like this for big areas. You can have very small ones for small details. But these are kind of on my left here. These are my standard brushes. In the center here, I have what are known as shade brushes, and they're for applying a shading wash, which I will go over in a little bit. But as you can see, they don't come to quite a point. They've got a bigger, kind of fluffier head here, and that's because the paint they use is a little bit different. And over here on my right, I've got dry brushes, and therefore a technique known as dry brushing, which literally your brush is dry. They're a little bit stiffer for use with the technique, and we're going to go into a little more detail. But to use these techniques, you can sort of do them with one brush, but the different style of brushes do make them a lot easier. Again, I'm not going to recommend any particular brand. Go to a hobby store. They will talk your ear off about their favorite brushes, what brushes they think are best, what brushes are great for a beginner, etc., and so forth. So you got your brushes. You also need your paint. I use here's a can of paint, little tub of paint. There's different styles of bottles. I use this brand. This is the Citadel color paints. There are a lot of different paint ranges. Again, this is what I use, but I'm not making a recommendation. I use it because I'm used to it. I've been using it for many years, so I'm used to it, and that's why I use it. Again, this is just my enjoyment hobby, so I'm not really pushing my artistic limits too much. But there are a lot of different brands of paint with a lot of different colors, a lot of different properties. This is a water-based acrylic. There are oil-based paints. There are a lot of different kinds of paints. Again, go to a hobby store. The techniques I'm showing you will work with the water-based acrylics. They won't necessarily work with oil-based paints because the thing with water-based acrylics is you can thin them out, you can dilute them with water. And in fact, you can use water to clean your brushes. The oil-based and some of these other ones, you need to use a solvent like thinner or alcohol to thin them down or to clean off your brushes. So that's the other reason why I like using them, is because cleanup is easy with these paints. They go on well, they dilute well, and again, I'm just used to them. But again, find what works for you. What works for you may be different than what works for me. But I have my acrylic paint. I'm just going to move this away. And I have my pot of water here. So my water pot. Be careful not to drink your water pot later. It's usually a problem if you have it in a mug and you're drinking your coffee at the same time. Don't do that. It's not fun. So these acrylic paints, they come in different types. A lot of different colors, but different types. So some paints will be known as a base paint, or a lot of different words for it, but always a base paint. Base paints tend to be a darker color, and they also have more pigment. So they cover a lot thicker. It takes less to cover up a miniature. For base paints, we're going to be doing two layers. I'm going to show you the technique, but these do cover more. With painting with the water-based acrylics, it is a building up of color. The paint you paint on top, the paint below will show through if you don't paint enough layers. And you actually want that to happen because you kind of want to build up color in areas where you want it to be brighter and have it darker in areas where you want it to be darker. So I'm just going to put that down for a second. So I've actually already started. So here are a couple of Space Marines I had started painting. I'm going to bring them a bit closer and see if you can see. So this one on the left, let's see if I'll get, his shoulder pad has had 2 coats. So you can kind of see that deep red color. This one on the right has only had 1 coat. I'm just trying to get it to focus. It's not focusing. Okay, yeah, okay, there we go. 1 color. You can, and actually his back, you can see the black underneath is still showing through. So that's why you do the 2 coats. You get the nice, rich, deep covered color. Because you don't want the black showing through for this. So yeah. So well, now how do we get this paint on? So you want to do 2 coats, and you want the first coat to dry before you start putting the second coat on. And you want to pick the right brush for your job. Don't use this brush for this model. No, because the paint's going to go everywhere. This is a big one. This brush, however, would be great for this one because it will cover a large area. Whereas if I'm trying to paint that one with this tiny little brush, I will be at it forever as I am drawing it on. Now, later on, if I want to add details to this, I do want to use a small brush. But for your base, you want to use the biggest brush that is convenient and the one that gets you good coverage without getting the paint kind of all over the other details you want painted. That being said, don't worry too much. If you get a little bit on another color, you can always clean it up later. So, for our first miniature, we'll paint a spaceship today. So we're going to start with this spaceship. And we're going to paint it, or no, yeah, this one. Yeah, we'll do this one. And we're going to paint it. We're going to give it a starting gray color because I want to show you something later. So we're going to start with the gray, and I got my gray here. So we open our paint pot. Oh, actually, shake our paint pot first. You're not going to see, but we shake our paint pot to shake it up. So this is the first kind of technique, which is getting your base coat on. And it's probably the simplest. But, okay, so we got our paint. We got our brush. This one's probably a good enough size. And we take a bit of our paint, and we put, and I got a palette here. You can use lots of different things for palettes. I used a tile at one point, just an old spare piece of like bathroom tile. I've used, the backs of the boxes miniatures have come in. There are a lot of different palette systems. There's actually a wet palette system for if you're getting more advanced. But really, you just want a place where your paint will sit and not kind of get absorbed. Alright, so we got our paint here. Now we want to thin it out a bit. So we take some water from our water pot, and we're going to thin the paint out a bit. This is going to help the paint just flow nicely. Now, you don't want it too thinned out, or it will just bead and it will go everywhere. You want to have enough to control, and you don't want too much on your brush. Just enough. Alright, so then it's just a matter of putting the paint on the miniature. And I'm leaving a little bit of darkness in the recesses. And we're going to go through other ways to do that later. But we're just putting the paint on the miniature. And when our brush gets a little bit empty, we just get a bit more, a bit too much there. And we're just putting it on the miniature. And just picking up the color. Yeah. Oh, you can see a couple places where the The prime, when I primed this, it was a little bit wet, so it stuck to the thing it was sitting on, and then the prime came off. So you do want to let your prime dry before it touches anything else. Just a little bit of gray. Gray, gray, gray. And we just long, nice, even strokes, not too much pressure. We're just getting it nicely covered, covering all the areas. Models like this are a good starter because they have some detail, but they're not like with the figures, and I'll show you in a second when I put this down. The detail can be concealed behind other things, so you got to just be a little careful when you're moving around an arm or whatnot that you're not getting paint everywhere. But this one, it's fairly basic, basic shape. Doesn't have a lot of things to work around, and it can be kind of one mono color. Well, we can add details later, but be one mono color, and it'll look nice. All right. Now the tricky thing is when you run out of spot to hold it. And actually, I will kind of work the paint in there because we're gonna do a little something else later after this is dried. Okay. So I hope you're getting the idea. I'm just making sure there's good coverage everywhere. And you can see how it's covering up. I've run out of spot to hold it. So there are painting handles you can use. Try not to touch the spots where you have painted because you'll get fingerprints, and you don't want fingerprints. And that's why it's okay. So actually, we're gonna let that dry. I'll finish that up. So that is kind of the first basic technique. And yes, after you've painted, clean the paint off your brush. Giving it a quick rinse in your paint pot to start is good, but you want to make sure you rinse your brushes out really well in a sink after. Brushes with paint that left in them start being brushes that don't paint so well. Okay, so I'm going to stop this here, and we're going to move on to our next technique. Okay, everyone, so for the second session, I'm going to use my friend here with the cloak. So, as you can see, I've given this cloak a 2 coats of base color to give it a nice, even color. Again, why you want 2 coats is because you don't want the underneath color showing through. Here's one that's had not 2 coats, so you can see the white, and actually I need to clean that up a bit there. The white is still kind of showing through a bit, so you want that nice, even color to work with. And we're going to layer up next, okay? We're going to layer up. As I mentioned earlier, painting miniatures like this technique is about building up color slowly into lighter and lighter areas. So we've got the nice even green here, and I painted that using this color. All right, so you can see this color. And we're going to layer on a shade of green higher. Okay? This you're not going to need to do. Well, you can do multiple layers. The more layers you do, the brighter the color you layer on will be. So we're going to do this layering with this brighter color. So again, we shake the pot, we open it up, we take our brush, and we get a little bit of paint out, just a little, not too much. And for this, you don't want to water this down quite as much because you want to control it. You don't want it going everywhere. You want to be very careful where it goes. We're going to just paint that down. And then, with this, you just start painting over the other paint in the areas that are higher. Alright, so just a little bit. Alright, nice. In the higher, while leaving the recesses unpainted. Alright, and along the edge of the cape here. And over here. A bit more paint. And we're just painting up on the areas that are higher. His shoulder. Right down that. I'm not doing a great job here. It's a little bit hard to do in front of the camera for me, so my apologies. But we're just building up the color over the areas that we consider the higher areas. And again, I'm just doing nice, light, bright strokes. And you can do this with several shades of color, doing just higher and higher areas every time, leaving the recesses dark, and you build it up. And patience is a virtue. Don't rush it. And what we're trying to do is give the impression of depth and of light. Light does not fall on cloth evenly. It has its own little shadows. Okay, I'm building up the color, Oh, and actually and you can see why you want to keep your brush a little bit wet, because otherwise it gets a little stickier and dries a bit. You don't want it too dry, because then it kind of clumps and it doesn't look right. And with each layer, it gets a little bit brighter. We don't want too much pressure. And what we're trying to do is create basically an illusion. So that's kind of the basic idea. You can see now, the focus right. The kind of darker areas are staying dark, and we're building up the light on the top. So you can layer color up that way. And I could even go up further again, which I'm probably going to, with this shade. But it would be even less, just more, very much on the top. And after it dries, I will probably do that. So that is one technique for building up color. That's the layering technique. And it's just picking a lighter shade and going over the higher areas. So we're going to move on to our next technique after this. Alright, for our next technique, we're going to do what is known as a wash. And we're going to do a couple washes. So, actually I won't use that. We are going to wash. I got my two battle stars here, and I've washed one previously. And so you can kind of see the difference. Now I did it in a sepia tone, just to make it very obvious. This is the primed version over here, without a wash. This is after a wash, a sepia tone. So you can see how it has made the details pop. It looks a lot browner. So a wash is with paint that acts more like an ink. It doesn't cover, but it stains. It stains everything. And it will pool in the lower areas and around details, kind of giving them that depth that way. So this one, you can kind of see how the pipes are a lot more evident. The details a lot more evident than the unwashed one, where it all kind of blends in. Now, we're going to do a wash on this unwashed one. And we're going to do one that's going to hopefully maintain its white color. And why we're going to do that, we're going to actually use blue. We're going to use blue to wash it, and we're really going to water it down. You don't have to water down your wash, but the more you do, the less it will stain everything else, and the more it will only kind of color those areas it's puddled. So we're actually going to use quite a bit of water for this. So I'm just getting it out of my water pot. Because we want this to be a very thin wash. The more wash you use, the more intense the color. Now, you can actually, so this guy we've been painting here, we can actually give him a wash as well after you've layered it up. You can, and that will actually help blend all the colors together, because they'll all be stained kind of one general shade, and they will kind of come together. But I'm just going to show you the technique briefly. So I'm going to show you actually here. So just so his cape here, that's a combination of both techniques. I've built the color up along with layering along the high rises of the folds, and I've given it a wash that will darken the inside of the folds. So you can kind of see how that works. For a wash, we've got our water. Shake up our ink. And take it out of the pot. Some. And we're going to mix it up. Alright, we really want a very thin ink. I actually might get some more water for this. Alright. Because we really just want it to pool in those areas that aren't the flat panels. Alright, so here we go. We got our thin ink here. Alright, and then you have your wash brush. Get a goodly amount, but not too much. And then it's just putting it over the model. And you can see, yeah, this is very thin, so it's not kind of sticking to the panels. I actually may have thinned it a bit too much. But just gonna, yeah. That's the thing, if you thin it too much, then it just beads and doesn't really do that much. But, yeah. Just spreading it around, spreading it along the model. Yeah, actually this is a bit too thin. We'll get a little more ink. You can also not just thin with water, you can thin with what's known as painting medium. That's generally actually a better, but the painting medium will maintain the consistency of the paint, whereas water changes the consistency. And as you can see, it started to bead and wasn't flowing exactly properly. But you can use that. All right, and we want to make sure we don't leave big puddles anywhere. We can just spread it over, spread it over, spread it over, but not big puddles anywhere. Want it to be just kind of along the edges and in crevices, and details. So as the water dries, the shade is left behind, and it really gives, the depth and the details are made more evident. And just no big puddles anywhere. Actually, yeah, I did water this down a bit too much. But for our purposes, this will be a good. Because as you can see, there we are. Yeah, your brush will just pick it up if it's in a puddle. You just kind of get the puddle. Alright, and that is kind of the basis of that. As you can see, my brush is picking it up. We're just... Alright. Okay. I'll probably cut some of this to the end. Alright, so, So here we go. You can already see the details have started to pop a bit more. Yeah, so that is one way of getting depth into a model is through an ink wash. Yeah. Alright, so we're going to move into the last technique I'm going to show you today. So we have here our monstrous friend, and he's got tentacles. These tentacles have a lot of ridges, so they're actually really good to use to demonstrate this technique called dry brushing. Again, you can do this before or after you apply an ink wash. An ink wash will darken the depths, but the dry brushing is to get kind of the tops, and I've kind of done it on this one. If you can see, I've actually done a wash and a dry brush on this tentacle, so it's kind of picked up the edges. So this one's unpainted. So we're going to get our dry brush. Where did I put that? Ah, here we are. So here's our dry brush, and we're going to get a lighter shade of the color I went with. So this is the base I went with. And here's a lighter shade. So dry brushing is to go up shades. Let me shake. Alright, so dry brushing, you're not going to be adding water at all. In fact, you want your brush to be dry. So you just get a very little bit amount of your paint. Put it on your palette, and then you're gonna work it in a bit to your brush, and then you're gonna work it out of your brush. You actually want there to be almost no pigment in your brush at all. Okay. A good way to test is your thumb. If you draw it along and it's just kind of getting the top, the top of your skin, you can't really tell there, but if it's just getting the top of your skin, that's probably about enough. And then you take your miniature and you're just lightly bringing your brush over the surface you want to lighten. And it's good to not always go in the same direction. You want to kind of not have streaks. You want to just have the color but not streaks. I don't know if you can really see it. It's a bit subtle at first. And this is better for areas with a lot of ridges. If there are large flat areas with a few ridges, you do want to use the layering technique, or at least I use the layering technique. If you find that dry brushing works for you in that case, you can certainly do that. Alright, so even after just a little bit, I think we can see. Yeah, let's get it focused properly. You can see the colors starting to have, looks like a little more depth. The raised areas are lighter, and the darker areas, the bottom areas, are darker. And you can go back and get a bit more of your paint. Dry brushes, you do need to wash very quickly after you're done with them because the paint is drying in them. And as I mentioned earlier, a brush with dry paint in it quickly becomes a brush that doesn't paint very well. Another thing is a piece of cardboard is actually really good for getting the paint off when you're trying to get your dry brush dry. The ridges really also let you see how you're doing. All right, a bit more. So we're going over this area, a bit lighter. Bit lighter gives it that nice highlighted texture on top. I'm trying to go in a little bit of a circular motion again to avoid streaks. Alright, well, let's see. Can you really tell? Yeah, I think you can tell on the screen. You can see that that has really highlighted the top while leaving the recesses nice and dark. The other one I actually did two dry brushes. I did a second dry brush with an even lighter shade of pink to really kind of get the top. And you can do that. You can add more and more layers. We're always building up color. With your next layer, you go even lighter and lighter pressure because you just really want to hit the very tops of the ridges, leaving kind of a gradient of color. Okay, so that is dry brushing. Alright everyone, so those were the basic techniques about miniature painting that I had to show you today. I hope it was informative. Thank you very much for joining MakerFest.